Say, Our Father, in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, one God, Amen. Make us worthy, O Lord, to say thankfully, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from the evil one. In Christ Jesus our Lord, thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, now and forever. Amen. Let's go over the questions from last time. I know things getting a little bit complicated, and I had a couple of complaints that it's getting a little bit more complicated, difficult. So we go over questions. The vision of Abraham in Genesis 15. Sure, I need to share the screen. Sorry. Yeah, who needs to see the face of Abuna? They need to see the screen. Okay. So the question goes into the following four choices. Confirmed the promise of bequeathing. It's an old word, means inquiring or acquiring or taking a great name. Is Genesis 15 vision about the great name, a royal name? Or is it about confirming the promise of worldwide blessing? Where would the great name be? Remember which chapter that great name would be? When was the promise of royal family coming from Abraham given with the sacrifice? It was during the circumcision of Abraham, that God told Abraham, I will change your name. It became, instead of Abraham, he became Abraham, and Sarai became Sarah. And God said, and I made a point to bring you two different references. One from the Masoretic, it said that Sarah will be the mother of kings, and in the Septuagint it says, and Sarah would have a son, and he will be the father of kings. So whatever it is, it had to be Sarah and Isaac, the source of the royal family. That's chapter 17, with the sacrifice of, or the process of the circumcision, which belongs to the second promise to get a name. When was the great, the worldwide blessing given? And God made an oath over a sacrifice to bless him and make him a blessing. And this was chapter 22. So you have, that's the third promise. And so B and C is almost the same. So this signified the Lord putting himself under a curse? Yes, that was it. Because we said when Abraham cut the animals into two, and the pillar of fire, the torch, and the smoke went in between, it means, and we looked into this from Jeremiah, we looked at it actually from the Hebrew study Bible, the Jewish study Bible, and we saw that this meant a curse. Like when the kings, they go into a treaty, they cut an animal into two, and they pass through them. What does it mean? If any of them break the covenant, let them be killed like these animals. So this, and you notice that Abraham didn't go through this. It was only God. The stuff that God did with Abraham is very touching and very shocking. He dealt with him and always putting himself there for Abraham. He told him this by words, he told it by actions. Don't be afraid, I'm going to be your shield. Then he goes to a covenant where God actually put himself under a curse for Abraham. How would you understand that? Can there be any curse on God? How can God put himself through a curse? Yes, he can. Because when the Son of God came, he was hung on a cross. What's that? Cursed everyone who's hung on a cross. So God took upon himself the curse of the covenant. So the one I highlighted in yellow is the right, correct answer, because Genesis 15 is where Abraham cuts the animals. I'm going to go back and review with you the three lines: the promises, the upgrading to covenants, and the fulfillment of those covenants. That's 6. I'm going to go review it again. God counted righteousness for Abraham when? And this is an important point. Don't please miss it, and don't ignore it, and just don't take it for granted. You have to read it. In 2 places. Noah believing God before the flood, before even he enters the ark. God counted righteousness for Noah, that he believed him and started building the ark. Same thing. When Abraham looked at the stars at the beginning of chapter 15, he was afraid. Because God told him, do not be afraid, meaning that Abraham was afraid. So he told him, come out. He came out, looked at the stars, and what happened to Abraham's heart? It was calmed. He was not anxious anymore. When God saw that Abraham's anxiety was comforted, was because he could see his heart, he could see his face, God could see him. And then he said, and God counted for Abraham that settlement of the heart, that quietness as faith. There's this theme would come later, and I want you to keep it in your mind, that God can actually look at the quietness of the heart, that you are actually confident, that you are assured. And he counted for you as righteousness. This is faith. To be assured when you're going through hard times, that's faith. That's why when Jesus comes and see his disciples rocking in the boat and just panicking, what would he say? When he wakes up from the sleep, he was in the boat, and wakes up and find them just shaking like leaves in the wind. And he sees them shaking. What does he say? Why have you doubted, you of little faith? Meaning, our anxiety when God is with us, just to have to make sure that God is with you. When God is with you and you're anxious, it shows lack of faith. But quietness is faith. So when Abraham actually, before he was circumcised, was quieted before God when he was afraid, when God showed him, but God showed him the stars, and he told him, look at this, your sons, your children will be like the stars of heaven if you can count them. So God counted righteousness for Abraham when he obeyed God and left his country. He obeyed God and sent away Hagar and Ishmael. He circumcised himself and the males in his household. Or after looking at the stars, there's a missing S here, and his heart was settled. And it's highlighted so you know that this is the right answer. Which chapter is that? Chapter 15. Right, again, the promises were all, the 3 of them, given in chapter 12. Let's go and review this, since the 6 and 7 is about this. I'll go and review with you this little piece here that actually summarized the whole thing. And I want you to look at it. It's very important. Here, this piece here. This is from a Scott handbook, A Father Who Keeps His Promises. Okay? So he writes for us, Genesis 12, first 3 verses, speak of the 3 promises. He told him in chapter 1, come out of your country, of your homeland, of your father's house, and I will. And once God started saying, I will, you're going to hear promises. Make you a great nation. That's the first promise. This is all in 12. Make you a great nation. The next one, I'll make your name great. And the third one, I'm going to bless you and make you a blessing to all nations. All the tribes of the earth will bless themselves by you. And we said, what does it mean? Who do you go to for blessing? What would it mean? So we know the first one is numbers of people, but we said nation, goy means people plus a land. That means that the promise is actually a composite promise. It's 2 things. You're going to have lots of kids, and I will give them land to live in it. Without the land, they will be people. This is the first one. The name. What does it mean to have a name? We said in antiquity to have a name, since there is no Facebook, there is no Instagram, there is none of that stuff, and you cannot have likes. So the only way you can be having a great name is to be a king. So he says, you will be the father of kings. So first you're going to have multiple kids, multiple people living in a land that will be their own. Second, you will be a father of kings. Third, I'll bless you and make you a worldwide blessing. You will be a blessing to everybody. What does it mean to be a blessing? Who blesses? We talked about this in chapter 2 in Genesis, and God blessed and sanctified. Who does the blessing and the sanctification? King rules. Who would do the blessing and sanctification? Think about it. A priest. So he's given the nation, the dynasty, and the priesthood. God's giving it to him. So the third, each one, the three promises will be upgraded to covenants. What does it mean to be into a covenant? The promise will be sworn an oath over, that somebody would swear an oath over what they promise. And that comes with a sacrifice. So in Genesis 15, we saw the two items. In the beginning, he said, I'm going to die, Lord, and I'm afraid I'm 90 years old. There's not much left for me. And I can see, my wife is like 80 years old at the time. How can an 80 years old be a mother? It's like I'm giving up. I don't see it. Getting to be anxious. So chapter 15 begins with God telling him, look at the stars, your kids will be like the stars. And ends with question number 2. How can I know that I will inherit the land? Remember that the nation is people and land. Chapter 15 covered the two of them. Nation, he said, look at the stars. Land, God said to him, cut me those animals in half. A cow and a ram, and I forgot, the three of them. And then two birds. Don't cut the birds. And then Abraham did it, and he stacked the halves on both sides. And then all of a sudden, it was sunset. He was tired of hushing all the birds, the vultures. They were trying to eat the meat. And he got tired, so he went on and slept. For somehow, he got into a trance. And in that trance, he saw God going through them as a pillar of fire and a pillar of smoke. Who is that? What's the pillar of fire? Where do you see this? In Exodus, when the people are going to get out of Egypt, they will be guided by a pillar of fire, and God will guide them by those two signs, as if he's showing him how they're going to reach the promised land again. But in this time, God himself walks through the two pieces to make an oath to Abraham that I swear I'll be accursed if I don't do what I promised. I promise to put you in this land as an owner, but your generations will do that. So this is number 1. So Genesis 15 is upgrading. It's a covenant with a promise and with an oath, and the oath is God going through this, making himself under a curse. The second one is a name, dynasty. You go to chapter 17, the circumcision. God says you have to circumcise yourself and all the males. And in this chapter, God, says to Abraham that you will change the name of your wife. You don't call her Sarah anymore. Call her Sarai, call her Sarah. And she will be the mother of kings. This is the first time God mentioned that after he promised to make his name great. The mother of kings. So in Genesis 17, you would have that verse written very clearly, and that from her you will have kings coming. Chapter 22, when he tells him to bring Isaac is the offering, and on top of Isaac's body, when the angel said, stop, don't kill him, God says, I swear by myself. This is the oath. He found nobody else, that's what the letter of Hebrews says, to swear by. He says, I swear by myself that I will bless you, and you will be a blessing to everybody. So, why is that? Because I told you this, and it's written in the notes. Isaac became the father of the nation. And if Isaac is consecrated to God by putting him on the altar, then the whole nation is consecrated. Moses is going to say that. He says, you are kingdom of priests. You're kingdom of priests. Meaning what? That you're going to go all over the world telling everybody about God. And take them out of the worship of idols. What does that mean? They will be a blessing to all the nations by bringing them to the knowledge of the true God. So the three promises over sacrifices, this one was the split animals, this one the circumcision, and this one was Isaac himself as a sacrifice. In each one of them, God make a covenant with Abraham to confirm the promises that he gave, the three promises. The fulfillment, how did this happen? By God fulfilling his promises and covenants. In the Mosaic covenant, I told you, Moses took him out of Egypt, sent him to the promised land. That is the first one. In the Davidic covenant, God makes a covenant with David to have his throne forever. When the angel comes, when the archangel Gabriel comes to talk to Saint Mary, he says he will sit on the throne of his father David forever. And then Jesus sends his disciples to all the world to fulfill the covenant of blessing. When he says, go to all nations and baptize them in the name of the Father and the Son, and teach them all that what I have taught you. So this is something that I wanted to go over so that you understand. This is the summary of everything we talked about. And today we're going to continue the follow-up after that. What happened to that covenant after Abraham? So let us go to the next question, which will be 12. According to the letter to the Hebrews, the test of Abraham was, that is Hebrews 11:17. Is it a test of love? Is it a test of obedience? Is it a test of faith? So essentially, it is not about love. No human being can love God, and God will not test the love of a human being. When I say this, I say nobody can love God and begin it, like this is going to be their duty. No. St. John says we love God because he loved us. So God is not going to test us for love, but what he would test us for is our trust in him. That's the whole point. It's a test of faith. That's why the letter to the Hebrews says, by faith, Abraham offered Isaac. By faith. It's not by his love, it's not by his obedience, it is by faith. Why was a test of faith? Because we said, when God told Abraham that Isaac will be the reason for him to have the nation, it's Isaac who will be the father of the nation, and God told him to bring Isaac and put him on the altar, there was a conflict, apparent contradiction. How can I kill Isaac and he become the father of the nation? And the only solution for this for Abraham is that Abraham to trust, to believe that God would raise Isaac from the dead. That's the test. It was not about love, was not about obedience at all. This is not about any of those. It's actually about love. Well, love and obedience is included, but that's not going to be a solution for Abraham. And I give you the test. The argument is, if I tell any father or mother, God wants from you to kill your son, to cut their throat, spill their blood, burn them. What would the person say? Lord, I can't. I can't. I don't have anything in me to be able to do this. You're asking something that is very difficult. But if God says, don't worry, if you kill him, I will raise him. Do you trust that? What would you say? Sure. At the end of the day, if they come back alive, then that's fine. We're all winners in this. And that's what Abraham had to do. But I don't think this is actually... God will never ask somebody to kill their children for him. He will never do that. Or what he wanted is to establish the foundation of the nation. The foundation of the nation is that God can conquer death and bring us out of our graves. And he will do that at the end of times. That's all what he wanted to do. That's why when we confess, the end of the creed says what? And we await the resurrection of the dead. This is part of what we believe. 5 points in the creed that we need to believe to become Christians, let alone Orthodox. Father, 1 point. Son, 2 points. Holy Spirit, 3 points. One Holy Catholic Apostolic Church, 4th point. 5th point is resurrection of the body, resurrection of the dead, and the life of the age to come. So this was a must for us to do. Today we cannot be Christians without believing in the resurrection of Jesus, the true resurrection of Jesus. So nobody out there says, oh, it was a made-up story by the apostles, it was an apparition, it was something that they all kind of imagined, it was a group hallucination. All that stuff is out there today. They deny the resurrection big time. Big time. The world does not want to accept the resurrection as a fact. And this is our foundation. The fulfillment of the covenant in Genesis chapter 17 is, we said 12, 15, 17, 22. What is the covenant in 17? Said 17 is where the circumcision is, and with the circumcision come the covenant of royalty, king. So when is that fulfillment? Before I look into this, it has to be with the king, whatever the king is. The king that God made a covenant with. The covenant on Sinai? No, Sinai was Moses. The conquest of the promised land, that's Joshua. It's not actually the fulfillment of the chapter 17 where the king is. The Davidic covenant, yes. That's when that chapter 17 was fulfilled. The covenant of blessing in Genesis 22? No, that would become in Jesus when he comes, the Messiah. The main reason that God made the covenant with Abraham was, I asked that's a question I started last time with. Why would we need another new covenant with Abraham? To renew the covenant with Noah after people became evil? No. He stopped. He said, I'm not going to bring the flood anymore. It was a grand type covenant. You don't need to do anything. I'm not going to destroy humanity. I'm going to do something different. To reward Abraham for his obedience to God's commandments? No. He can reward him without making any covenants or making future promises. To bless Israel? Why? What's so special about them? They were a blessing. They should have been a blessing to other nations. To bless and sanctify all people? Yes, that is the goal. He wanted to have humans not just live and eat and drink and marry and build houses. He wanted them to be a family with God, to be in God's family. So how he's going to do this? By consecrating Abraham and his family. So Abraham becomes the father of priests, of people that would actually bring all nations to him. Is that clear? I hope that everybody on the same page with this. Okay. The 15 is a tricky question. It's just that it's not 8 years, it's 8 days. I just want you to be awake when you read the stuff. And that's it. Let's go into this new one. Unless you have a comment or a question about this one, let's conclude this one. Okay. Now, let us share the next one. Now we go into chapter 6 in our study. And inquiry points or questions. I think last time we have misnumbering. We're going to correct that. We're going to follow up on the covenant of Abraham, and we see how did it continue. What happened with the covenant when it goes to his children, grandchildren? How did they see that? It's very important to understand that the covenant is for Abraham and his family. So how his children will take the covenant? Will they take it seriously? Will they take it personally? Will they not take it at all? How are they going to deal with it? So if we finish talking about the covenant with Abraham in chapter 22, right? Genesis 22. So from 22 all the way to end of the book of Genesis, what happened to those covenants? How did it go? Did we have another covenant? No. The next covenant will come in Exodus. In Exodus, starting in chapter 3 and 4, when God meets Moses, and in the burning bush, he's going to make a new covenant with Israel. So let's talk about the covenant with Abraham children, how he's going to lead. Yes. Is it shared? Okay. So the title of this chapter is The Covenant with Abraham Continued. That's from Genesis 23, immediately after 22, all the way to the end of Genesis, which is 50 chapters. Notice that we are spending six sessions on Genesis. Why is that? Why do we, Abuna, out of the almost 40 books of Old Testament, we spend 6 out of 16 sessions only on one book? Why? Because that one book has 3 out of the 6 covenants. 3. You take 1 out, that's the new covenant. We'll talk about it in the New Testament. Then you have 3 out of 5. We definitely need to spend more time in Genesis than any other book. Because if we don't understand Genesis, the rest of the Bible will be meaningless. It's just a bunch of stories. You don't know exactly why they are there and what happened, why we picked those stories. Because they relate to the 3 covenants in Genesis, and definitely more to the one in Exodus that we're going to look into next time. Inquiry questions. What is the meaning of Genesis 15, 13 to 16? That's the vision of Abraham. This is important. It's an important prophecy that God had foretold his friend Abraham about. The second point of inquiry, is there a spiritual analogy in Abraham's calling? You bet. There is a lot of spirituality in the calling of Abraham. How did the children and grandchildren of Abraham carry on the covenant? That's the major part of what we're going to do today. You have children. You have Isaac and Ishmael. And then you have Isaac, have Jacob and Esau. And Jacob had 12 sons and 1 daughter that we know of. How each of those individuals handled the covenant of Abraham. They are now tied as a family to God. How are they going to carry on this relationship? Under this, how can we understand the blessing right in Genesis 27? This is a very important chapter. 27, after 22, go 27. It's a really very, very significant chapter. We might take pieces from it today. Why was Joseph both favored and hated? What's the point in relationship to the covenant? Why the story of Joseph that you all know? The boy in the coat of many colors, very loved by his father, but at the same time he is very hated to his guts by his brothers. And the last point of inquiry, what is the significance of Jacob blessing his children? Why was Judah assigned the royal rule? You're going to look into that. So we already said the 3 promises: nation, royal, and priest, right? Nation with a king and priest. So those things are assigned, given to Abraham, to have king who rules over all the nations, to have priest that serves all the nations, and to have people as the number of the stars of heaven. Now, we were supposed to read the last 25 chapters. Let's start with the first point. What's the meaning of Genesis 15, 13 to 16? I always, whenever I read the book of Genesis, these 3 verses touched me very specifically. I'll tell you why. Look at what God said here. This is exactly when Abraham cut the animals, chapter 15 at the end, and actually God walked through them in a pillar of fire and pillar of smoke. What did God say after he finished walking through it? Then the Lord said to him, "Know for certain that for 400 years your descendants will be strangers in a country not their own, and that they will be enslaved and mistreated there. But I will punish the nation they serve as slaves. And afterward they will come out with great possessions. You, however, will go to your ancestors in peace and be buried at a good old age. In the 4th generation, after 400 years, your descendants will come back here where Abraham was. For the sin of the Amorites has not yet reached its full measure." Why is this piece very special? What's God saying to Abraham here? Now, Abraham had not yet gotten Isaac even. There is no Isaac. And God is telling him what? He's telling him, you have a very big number of people. And yes, I'm going to give them this land. This is the promise, the covenant that he's making about the land in that chapter 15. And then what? He said they will be strangers in a foreign land. What kind of foreign land? He didn't tell him where. And we know later the foreign land would be, where would the Israelites go and be slaves? In Egypt. So in Egypt, he's telling him about, listen to this, he's telling him about Joseph being sold, but in a very short way. Joseph being sold, envied by his brothers, sold to the Ishmaelites, taken to Egypt. There he becomes the great man, and he invites his family, the family of Jacob, to come to Egypt, where they would live there for 400 years. He's telling him all that in one statement. And then he will tell him of the change of circumstances. Instead of being the favorite family in Egypt, they'll be slaves. And he's telling him that at one point, they will get out of there. Not only will give him a specific, something very specific, he says, will great riches. They will come out of there after I judge that nation with great possessions. He speaks about a very small detail. Why? I think Abraham is interested to know that if I tell you that your great-grandchildren will be slaves, that will shock you. But then I will tell you, no, they will be freed. But then you're going to say, slaves freed? How are they going to live? So God is giving him the comfort and say that they will come out with great possessions. Something is going to happen the night they will come out, that they will have to be rich. So this is what will happen. And God is telling him that. And then he's saying, but you don't have to worry about all that. You will die before that, very long time before. Why? And Abraham's going to say, why? Why do they have to go anywhere? We are in the promised land. Why they can't live here? Just stay here. And listen to this. God is saying to him, because the sin of the Amorites, who are the Amorites, is one of the descendants. Actually, they are the most powerful of all the Canaanites. Amorites were the greatest kingdom among all the Canaanites in the place. So people knew about the Amorites from a very far distance. But he's saying to him, their sins are not yet complete. Okay, what does that mean? Anybody knows? That the sins of the Amorite, the owners of the land now, is worthy of kicking them, but not yet. They will reach that. When are they going to reach that? It's for me to take over their land. And God said, those people that you live with are very sinful, and they are going to reach a point where they need to be kicked out of their land. And that point is by the force, by 400 years from from your descendants going down to Egypt. What is God saying to Abraham? That's a lot. I would say this is something that no one can expect from even a regular friend. God is giving him the future, and he's giving him actually the reason for why he is doing what he is doing. Let me see why we lost this. Okay. So this is a very specific piece, and I want us to kind of keep that in mind. Genesis 15, 13 to 16 is a friend speaking to a friend and explaining to him secrets. God had done this many times with Abraham. One day he's going to go and burn Sodom and Gomorrah, and God says, shall I hide from Abraham? And as if he's saying, like, should I hide from my friend what I'm going to do? What's the business of Abraham? Lot is there. He might be worried about Lot. So he gave him a chance to intercede for the city, Sodom and Gomorrah. Same thing here. At the same time, while the Lord is making the covenant of land and nation with Abraham, the fulfillment of the promise was revealed to him. God spoke of the sojourning of the family of Jacob in Egypt. The details of how they would go to Egypt was not given. Later we saw the unfolding of God's plan in Joseph's mission. God spoke of the Israelites' hardship in Egypt, of their exodus with great possessions. God told Abraham their final arrival in Canaan in the fourth generation. God told Abraham the reason for this temporary detour is that the sin of the Amorites has not yet reached the full measure. God had known that in 400 years from the time of his covenant with Abraham, it would take 400 years for Amorites to do enough evil worthy of their expulsion from the land. You understand? This is like very special, a special treatment. And all of that because Abraham trusted God. Listen to this. In God's mind, he's a very faithful person, God is. If you trust me, in return I trust you. How do you do that? You trust me, I'll tell you my secrets. I'll tell you what I'm going to do. This is how God is working with Abraham. Here, in one short prophecy, the Lord told Abraham of the summary of all the events, from the covenant with him all the way to the events in the book of Joshua. That means the rest of Genesis, Exodus, Numbers, Joshua, all the way to the entering of the promised land. The Lord told Abraham of many things, including his judgment of Sodom and Gomorrah. Abraham was truly a close friend of God. Very true. That's what a covenant is. A family member. The second point, which is a smaller point, is what do we learn? It can be like chapters can be written on this, books can be written on this. What do we learn from the journey of Abraham with God? In the covenant with Abraham, there are many aspects that can be looked at as model for intimacy with God. First, it is God who initiated the relationship through calling Abraham. This initial step established the covenant on God, not on man. It was God that calls. He is the foundation. He's the rock. Later, when a person is tested, if Abraham is tested, they can trust in God and not in their own strength. If I started, I would doubt was I like a moment of like a slingshot approach. I just give it a chance, and then if I don't feel like it, then it stops. No, it was God who started, and when God starts, I am assured that this is very firm. Faith is trusting God to always do what God promised. Second, the human participation was in detaching from all earthly bonds, family, country, land, and even his only son. He had to keep everything out, and God has to be always his only goal. The great ascetics means here the monks who lived in the deserts, or even people who live in the city and they detach themselves from all desires and lusts and attachments, followed the same example and lived as sojourners, exercising fasting, vigils, and poverty to gain closer intimacy with God. There are times when the friend of God has to go through a darkness of faith where he can't see anything. Like we saw in chapter 15, what Abraham felt. What did he feel? Did God abandon me? Did I misunderstand? Was I misled? Was something wrong with this? I really don't know. It seems like there's nothing. I don't hear any voices. I don't see any things. My old wife is barren. She cannot have any children. I'm getting older. I'm not going to have any children. What do you call that? It's a night of faith. You're just going by trusting God. Nothing you see, nothing you hear, nothing you can experience in your physical body that can assure you of anything. They call this the night of faith. The night of faith. Or the darkness of faith. Where nothing seems to make sense. Only trusting God's power and love would keep the friend of God going through the darkness. Ultimately, the saints who walk the journey will find their rest and consolation in God. They will be consoled. But after they have to go through this agony, like Jesus on the cross, why have you forsaken me? Even Christ, the Son of God, will have to go through this experience. This is the spiritual lessons. I remember, I was reminded, last time I said there were 3 people in the Bible that had their names given by God. Actually, I'm mistaken. There's a 4th one that was reminded that. Was a 4th one. When you read the book of Genesis, we said Isaac was picked by God. The name was picked by God. Who else? We said Jesus and John the Baptist. You add Ishmael too. The angel spoke to Hagar and told her, you will call his name Ishmael. Means God listens. God hears. So 4, not 3. I might find someone else, but 3 inside the covenant, 1 outside the covenant. Okay, the third point. Now this is the meat of this session, is what would the children of Abraham do with the covenant? I skipped over Ishmael because Ishmael started by persecuting Isaac. That's what we say, and I'm gonna go over him very quickly. Ishmael was a teenager, and it seems like an annoying one. And Isaac was a little baby, was just still wrapped in swaddling cloth, and his mother is, feeding him milk. And it seems like Ishmael was making fun of Isaac and picking on him. Why? Why would a teenager, half-brother, pick on a baby? Think about it. I should have written this piece, but it's very important to think about this. Why would the older brother, who is half-brother, he's a brother from Abraham, but not from the mother, pick on a little baby? You think if they are going to share equally, there will be okay. I think he knows that this baby is in a status higher than him, better than him. Because his mother is, Ishmael's mother is a slave. Isaac's mother is, and there's no rivalry that comes between two different places. He actually in the same place. He's the son of Abraham, and the other one is the son of Abraham. But one is the son of a slave, and the other is the son of a princess, the queen. Would you pick on him? I guess this is natural. Human beings. God doesn't want what's natural. So he was kicked out of the covenant very early on. Cannot have that. You cannot have that type of attitude. Those who think they are slaves, they cannot feel their preciousness in the sight of God. So he didn't feel it. He didn't feel anything special about him. In a way, you can say this. Ishmael was circumcised, so he's part of the covenant like anybody else. But he says, oh, so what? The slaves in my father's house, everybody is circumcised. So what's the big deal? This is a thought that's very dangerous, including in the church. When somebody in the church is jealous, and for whatever reason, might be in a family, might be in a... But you have been baptized. You have Christ inside of you. What makes you less than anybody else? He couldn't believe it. He couldn't believe that he is in God's sight like Isaac. He couldn't believe. So he picked on him. So the mind, the attitude of this person is, God didn't give me enough. He's given the other one much better than me. And for this reason, I hate him. So this, I didn't write Ishmael, but I want you to know this. St. Paul is going to pick on it and says, why the Jews were persecuting the Christians? Why they persecuted Jesus? Why do you think? Why the Muslims persecute the Christians in their countries? Why? Because they look at them and they see something better. If they were not seeing something better, why would they persecute them? I wouldn't persecute somebody who's less than me. Look at your schools. Look at the work. Who gets picked on? Either someone who's weaker, but sometimes better. Weaker, yes, but better. People feel bad for somebody who is not better. They feel bad for them. But they don't feel bad for somebody who is, let's say, a smart bookworm who is not a bodybuilder, gets picked on by a not too smart someone, right? That's how it is usually. So they picked on the more privileged. That is not the strongest. So that's why Ishmael is not privileged. He thinks this way in his mind, but he thinks that Isaac is more privileged but weaker. He can pick on him. Isaac. We go into Isaac. You don't need to speak much about Isaac. Isaac was put on the altar. He is the heart of the matter. He was the one that the covenant was made on top of his body by him. By him, God said, your nations will be called. Your descendants will be called. I want to go to the marriage immediately. In the marriage, things that Abraham said to his servants. So Abraham brought Eliezer of Damascus, the head servant. Like the head servant in our church, head servant. Head servant means the greatest servant in his house. And he told him, come, put your hand under my thigh and swear an oath. To put his hand under the thigh is to make an awesome, a solemn vow to put himself under a curse. Some people try to explain why under his thigh. You might say it's just because it's very close to the circumcision where he has a covenant with God, as if he's actually swearing before God that he would do this. And let it be. So he told him two things. I want you to get a wife. You have to do those things you should be very careful not to do. First, you have to go to my land, to Padan Aram, where I came from, the place that God called me and said, I get out of it, and find a wife from my family. Don't do this. Don't take a wife from the Canaanite girls. That's number one. Two, and the servant says, what if the woman that I find over there doesn't want to come back with me? Should I get your son to go there and marry there and live there? And God said, never do it. don't do it. I prefer that Isaac remain single, have no children, than to bring him back or to give him a wife from these people. Why? Why is Abraham saying that? In relationship to the covenant. Think about the covenant again. Because God called him out of the land. So he knows that God wants his nations, the people that come out of Abraham, to be in the land that he would show him. That's number one. Why not from the Canaanites? Okay, stay in the land, just marry anyone. Like the descendants, we see the grandchildren marrying from the Canaanites. Why would not marry Isaac from the Canaanites? They are accursed people. God told him, these people are so evil, I'm going to take them out of the land and put your seed. So would you marry from someone that God said they are under a curse? They are actually evil enough to be kicked out and annihilated? Will you? Some people might say, yeah, if they're beautiful enough, if they're attractive. That's what they would say. We'll see that. But Abraham gave those two conditions. This is what it is. Abraham swearing an oath not to marry Isaac to a daughter of the Canaanites who live in Canaan, not to take Isaac back to Mesopotamia. The servant prayed to God for guidance and succeeded in bringing Rebekah back as a wife for Isaac. The reasons for Abraham's strict instructions are the calling of Abraham to leave the homeland and to live in the land of the promise, and what God had communicated to Abraham regarding the evil ways of the Canaanites that would end in their destruction. He doesn't want to link his son to that tragedy, to that this drama of these people. It's an evil drama. Isaac, a living sacrifice, embodied the blessing of God to Abraham. And through his descendants, to all nations, they will be blessed by Isaac. Isaac begot twin brothers by Rebekah, Esau, and Jacob. Isaac had to pass the blessing of God to one of his sons. It was natural that the blessing should be passed to the firstborn. Right? We said the blessing was Isaac. How did we know that? By putting him on the altar, he himself became the blessing and the sanctification. He was holy. He was a blessing. So now he has to move this blessing from himself, from his existence, to the blessing has to move on. This is a covenant with the family, has to go on. So Esau and Jacob now, it is natural that he thinks of his firstborn. We said that before. Firstborn is the carrier of the covenant. He has to carry it. Esau, let's talk about Esau. Esau was a skilled hunter. That's how the Bible describes him, who abandoned the way of Abraham and ignored the strict instructions of his grandfather Abraham. How do we know that? Listen to what he did. He took 2 Hittite wives. Hittites were part of this Canaanite culture. 2 Hittite wives who were grief of mind to Isaac and Rebekah. Why were they grief? Why the daughters-in-law were grief to the father and mother-in-law? Why, do you think? Why would they be bad and giving them hard time? Grief meaning what? This older couple, by the time Esau was 40 years old when he got 2 wives. 40. We're not talking about a teenager. So how old was Isaac and how old was Rebekah? Most probably, Isaac was 40 when he got married. So you're talking about an 80 years old. Isaac lived to be 180 years old. So he was 80. And Rebekah was almost the same. So what would that be? So you got old woman and old man. And very soon, Isaac has actually lost his sight. They get cataract. In the old times, they get cataract and they don't know how to get rid of it, so they get blind. So why were they grief? Think about it. 2 girls, most probably very attractive girls. Why would they grieve the old people? Definitely because their ways are very different. They're very different. They did things that Rebekah and Isaac was very unagreeable to, very unhappy about. They were living day and night in this bitterness. So this is the first thing Esau did. Did he care what his parents would say? No, he didn't. Did he care what Abraham already? And Isaac, I'm sure, told they were twins. Esau and Jacob were twins. So he told them 100 times. Abraham said, Don't marry from those girls. Don't go back to my homeland. At least those two things keep in mind. This is the covenant. And what did they do? What Esau did? He became a hunter. They had, the whole family is shepherds. They're not farmers, and they're not anything else. He went and became a hunter. What does a hunter do? He's just wild. He wants to spend his time in the fields and, kill animals to eat. And that's it. He doesn't want a hard work in tilling the ground or, shepherding sheep. He just wants to find food when he wants and go for it to kill. Same way, he wanted to marry. He went. And not only get married to one, he gets two. What does it say? What does it say when he gets married couples? You don't go buy one shoe, you go buy a couple of pairs of shoes. You don't buy one trouser or a couple of, or a shirt, you buy two shirts. It's not about your need. It's actually about your wants, your desires. So he is not in need of a wife. He wants to fulfill his desires. Lust. So he took two Hittite wives together. This is something that's not happened in the patriarchs. We don't hear about Abraham marrying more than one by his choice. Why did Abraham marry Hagar on top of Sarah? Was it Abraham's desire? No. It was Sarah. Sarah was dying to have a child and said, like everybody else, if I can't give you a child, let my slave girl do that, and then she will give me a child. She will be my surrogate mother, and I will adopt that child to be mine. But Hagar didn't give her the fun. We're going to see Jacob actually marrying 4, but again, not by his choice. But this guy, Esau, had, by his own choice, married 2 Hittite wives who were grief to the parents. He was acting like the unrestrained, lustful way of God's people at the time before the flood. Remember at the beginning of the flood? In chapter 6 it says this. And the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful or attractive, and they start picking, this is the word that says, whatever they desire. It's almost like open buffet. Open buffet strategy. You don't go and order your plate. No, you go there and pick whatever you want. So they did that. Means they started to marry more than one woman. He did exactly the same. So when this happens, you end up with the flood in the old times. When this happens in the new and in the way of the patriarchs, then this is going to be a bad end. Later in Genesis, he would despise his birthright. He would look at it as something not useful. He seek to kill his brother. He marry other women on top of them, and eventually leave the promised land altogether to inhabit the land of Edom. Became his land, something else, which today is in Jordan, in the kingdom of Jordan. So you have this wild man who doesn't at all, how does he deal with the covenant? He despises the covenant completely. He doesn't think of it as something, which we have today. You might have somebody in the church who cares less about what the church is, who cares less about what Jesus did for us. He cares, they care less. Are going to stay in the church? Absolutely not. They're not. Once the problem comes or something happens, they will leave. So the life of Esau represents those who abandon the covenant and live like the people outside the covenant. Esau is the 4th in the list of excommunicated persons. Give me the 4. Who is the first one excommunicated? Cain. The next one? The descendant of Canaan. Canaan, right? Who his father Ham looked at the nakedness of his own God. Actually, Canaan was the one to inherit that curse, that excommunication. And then what? The third one is Ishmael, and now Esau. This is all excommunicated, out of the covenant. Okay? An example of a profane person. The Bible calls him profane. What does profane mean? What's a profane? Who despise holy things. A person who look down on holy things and consider them as nonsense. Nothing. They don't know what holy is. You see them how they behave in the church. They behave with communion. They behave with baptism, with their mouth, with their eyes, with their ears. They don't think of anything as holy or respectful. Okay? Jacob. Now there's a word the Bible used with Jacob that's very beautiful. He called the Hebrew word is tam. Tam. Do you know what tam in Arabic means? Tam. When you say tamam. Tamam is a Hebrew word as Arabic as well. Tam. Perfect. Complete. Has another meaning in Hebrew. It could be gentle. So you have Esau, who is violent hunter, and you have Jacob, who is tam, gentle. A man of a home man, a homie, somebody who is very well acquainted with the life at home. But this other one is a wild, out of control person. Party man, you can say that. A party animal. That's Esau. So complete, gentle, plain, undefiled, upright. Jacob was obedient to his parents. This is very interesting. You see, actually, in Jacob, when the fight ensued between him and Esau, it's very interesting. It says, and Isaac dismissed Jacob. What does it mean? Isaac dismissed Jacob to go to his uncle and get a wife from there. He told Isaac, go in peace, the peace of God be with you. What does it mean? That he waits for his father to tell him to go. He doesn't go whenever he wants to go. He doesn't come whenever he comes. He is very keen to see how he pleases his parents. Jacob was obedient to his parents. This was repeatedly shown in his behavior. He was very determined to get the blessing of his father and carry on the covenant of God. He resorted to guile, trickery, to cheat, to take the birthright and the blessing. Both of them, he wanted to get it. He wanted to get the blessing of his parents. He understood how so much important to him. It's like life or death. Even if he's had to cheat, he will get it. From his brother, Jacob received the blessing of Isaac through a meal. His mother prepared a meal made of 2 young goats that Jacob killed. He made a sacrifice. Jacob had to put on, that's Genesis 27. This is important. To put on the goat's skin and the clothing of Esau. It's very interesting. I'm just going to say this is not written. Who goes to his father, enter into his father's presence, with a body that's slaughtered, but has the smell of his brother. That body was prepared by his mother. And as he goes out, he gets a blessing to give to his children. Who's that? Who had the body slaughtered, but he goes to his father, and his father bless him, and he gives this blessing to 12 children. That's Jesus. So Jacob, through his seeking the blessing of his parents, became a very vivid, strong type of Christ. Just this is a side note. I didn't write it, but you can think about it. Jacob struggled to obtain God's blessing through a liturgical meal that involved the senses. You come here in the church, you don't see Christ, you don't see the physical person, but you smell incense. You taste the bread and wine. You touch the veil. You touch the icons. So your other senses are all involved, except the eye is seeing something different. You're seeing liturgical items. You're seeing icons. You're seeing veil. You're seeing the altar. You're seeing the clothing of the priests and the deacons. But you're getting what at the end? The blessing of sons. You're getting the blessing of God, the Father. Although you can't see anything. This is the same thing. Isaac took his son. Why would Rebekah put the clothing of Esau on Jacob? Very simple. Jacob's job was what? He's a shepherd. What do you think a shepherd smells like? Have you ever smelled that? Stinks. Not a good smell at all. What do you think a hunter's clothing smells like? They only kill the animal at the end of the hunt, but where do you stay the rest of the days waiting for the hunt? on the trees, in the grass, where there's wild flowers, what do you smell like? Nature, you smell like a field, you smell like grass, you smell like flowers. So she, knowing that, she knows that her husband is going to smell him because he can see, he has to replace that seeing, brought the clothing of Esau and put it on him so that he would smell like, not like Jacob. And then she covers his hands, his arms, and his neck with the skin of the goat. Imagine how hairy Esau must be, because the name they give him, it means like he's very hairy, very hairy, very, very hairy. So Jacob felt like Esau, smelled like Esau, the only thing was voice, and he made the food that Esau would make. Isaac, I think, he had to kind of agree with it. That had to be Esau. It's very difficult, but as if Jesus is saying to the Father, I am them. I am them. They are in me. You accept me, you bless me, you're blessing them, each one of us. Because he took our flesh. He took our aroma. When he goes to his Father, the Father smells who and tastes who. Taste us, smell us, hug us, kiss us in him. Does that make sense? So this is the liturgy. This is what we do in the liturgy. All right? So it is a type of the Eucharistic liturgy. Jacob presents himself to his Father in the skin of richly killed animals, like the crucified Christ offering of himself to the Father. And like all the common union sacrifices, Jacob became the carrier of the blessing from the Father to his sons. He did not choose a wife for himself, but followed the instructions of his parents to do the same for himself as Abraham had done for his father Isaac. Now, Abraham said, Isaac, my son, should be married from those, and he did. Isaac let Abraham choose for him a wife. Jacob is letting his parents choose a wife. So what the father said, Jacob said, arise, go to Paddan Aram, to the house of Bethuel, your mother's father, and take yourself a wife from there of the daughters of Laban, your mother's brother. Jacob did not leave until his father blessed him and dismissed him. It's very liturgical. Very liturgical. The church always insists, don't go from the church until Abuna says, go in peace. If you need to go early for any reason, you have a test or whatever, you go to Abuna and say, can I leave? Yes. And I say this to the deacons. This is very biblical. You want to be blessed? Don't come and go whenever you want. You want to be a deacon, you bless your tunya. You want to serve in a service, you take a blessing. Not because Abuna wants to control you. This is actually for us, for each of us to be blessed. To be blessed. And I think the same thing happened for the priest when I go to the bishop. Same thing for the bishop with the Holy Synod or the Patriarch. So we're all under this fatherhood. We feel the fatherhood of God on top of us. And then he didn't leave until his father gave him the dismissal. Jacob left his parents. He did not see his mother again. Rachel became Jacob's replacement for his mother. Why? Simply, when he saw her, actually, this is the only time in the whole Bible when a man sees a woman, runs, hug her, a girl, and kiss her and cry. This is not a hug or a kiss of a sexual nature or desire. Why would you cry? People, when they have their lust working, they don't cry. Why would he cry when he kissed Rachel? Imagine that and think about it. Because who is Rachel? She is his cousin, the daughter of his uncle from his father, or to his brother of the father or the mother. So who would she look like most probably? His mother. She looked like his mother. He saw a young girl who had the same features, the same blood of his mother. And he knew that he's not going to see his mother again because his brother swore an oath to kill him. And the father and the mother told him, don't come back. Don't come back until everything is settled. Until your brother forgotten about you. So when he sees this girl, and he sees all that attachment he has to his mother, he was very attached to his mother, in this girl, what do you think he's going to feel like? That's it. I'm going to have this girl. She's going to be my wife. And in those days, it's not like today. There's not that much lust in the relationships. Relationships was built on attachment, bonding, and a family covenant. Not about I desire. This is left to the people outside. The outside of the covenant, people think about sexual stuff all the time. They don't have anything but that. But people of the covenant with God were very noble-minded. They were actually talking about their relationship with God. God was with them all the time. They didn't need to do this. Anyway, so he did not plan on marrying four wives. He was coerced into marrying Leah by a trick from his uncle. He gave him first Leah, and he didn't wake up in the morning after the wedding, and he found himself sleeping in the bed with the older sister. Imagine. That's crazy. So he goes screaming to Laban. Laban says, okay, you want the other one? We don't give the younger before the older. Leah's the older. Give me 7 years again, and I will give you. So 1 week later, he gives him the second daughter. He marries the second daughter, and now he has to work 14 years. And then he says, so I don't have anything. You're going to have me 2 daughters and their kids, and I have no thing to live by. So work another 7 years for the sheep. So he had to work how many years? 21 years. Jacob got tired. He got older, tired. He left at the year number 19. Why? We'll tell you in a second. So he left actually because Rachel had no kids. Rachel had no kids. So she forced him to marry her servant, Bilhah. And the servant gave him 2 children, Dan and Naphtali, I think. But then Leah already had given him 6 kids. Leah had given 6, Rachel had nothing. So she gave him Bilhah, she gave him 2. 6 plus 2, they were 4. I'm just making it short. 4, 2, 4. 4, 2, 2. Then Leah said that I don't have any children, I'm not getting any more children. Let me give him my own servant. She gave him Zilpah, and he had 2 more kids. The women now are actually controlling the situation. They're in charge. So you have 4 from Leah, 2 from Bilhah, another 2 from Zilpah, and then Leah gets another 2. They become her. So 4, 2, 2, 2. That means 6 and 4 is 10. Eventually, Rachel gets the child. And she called him Joseph, and because she wanted more, he called it Joseph, mean God, give me more. And when Joseph was 1 year old, Jacob said, that's it. I'm not staying. He waited on Rachel, got a child, and then after the child became old enough to bear the traveling, he said, let's go. And they run. They flee from Laban. Laban gets so angry when they heard that Joseph had escaped. Jacob. So he swore to kill him, whatever. They get together, and God speaks to Laban, don't do anything to him. And Laban gets scared by God. And he doesn't do anything to Jacob. Jacob didn't care an iota about what Laban would do to him. He knew he didn't do anything wrong. Now, when we go to meeting his brother, Jacob, they told him, your brother is coming. Oh, so they're going back to the promised land, and all these people with him, and the animals, and he's going to meet his brother. And they tell him, your brother coming with 400 camels. Jacob starts shaking like a leaf in the wind. He's just so anxious. Why is he anxious? Simple. Because he took the blessing, yes, but he knows in his heart, taking the blessing by trickery does not guarantee God's approval. Yes, my father gave me the blessing, but would God back this one up? Would God be obliged to back my blessing? To confirm it, to seal it? No. Why? Because our God is a righteous God. He's fair. I tricked my brother into taking his birthright, and I tricked my father into taking the blessing. Why would God back me up? I might as well die here, and with my kids and my wives, and everything will be slaves after me. So what would he need to do? He had no other choice. He has to settle it down with God. That's it. There is no one else. His father was alive. His father would not be doing anything for him. No one can. So one night he has to stay at the border of the promised land. Between him and the promised land is the Jordan. He actually crossed all the people on the other side. He stayed on this side. And that night he fought with God. Why was he fighting with God? Not to conquer God. It was not a wrestling match that the angels were watching. No. He wanted the blessing from God personally. And God said, and I can imagine, why should I bless you? Tell me about one good thing that you did that I should bless you for. You tricked your father, the blind man took advantage of him, and you tricked your brother when he was hungry. Why should I be with you in this? You want me to be with you in this? You're a hypocrite. You're filled with tricks and cheating. Why? You want me to be a cheater too? And Jacob cried, bawled his eyes out, and hang on to God. And God said, it was an angel, like an angel appearing to him, like a man. And he was walking away from him. Just get away from me. I don't associate with the likes of you. That's what I would say. That's what God would say to him. And Jacob said, no, please. If you leave me here, everybody will die. Start hanging on to his heels. That's what Hosea would say in the prophecy. He hang on to the heels of this man and told him, I'm not leaving you until you bless me. I want a confirmation of this. So he said, you want the blessing? No blessing. And then he got him on his hip. His hip was dislocated. This is a very tough joint. This is the toughest joint in the whole body. To dislocate this, you need a lot of force. So he went out of this. He said, so what's your name? He said, Jacob. He said, no Jacob anymore. You will be called Israel because you fought with God and man and won. You're a man of violence. You take things not by. That's what Jesus will come to say in the New Testament. He says, those who take the kingdom of God will have to take it by force. You're a man of violence, but in a good way. So he said, okay, I'll bless you, but from now on, you're not going to have any power. Because you thought yourself you can do anything. You were depending too much on your own smartness and your own muscles. Not anymore. From that time on, Jacob was a man to limp. He entered the promised land limping on his one leg. So his blessing from his father was confirmed. Jacob believed in the promise of God to his grandfather Abraham, and as the carrier of the blessing, he in turn blessed his 12 children. Joseph was born in Paddan Aram. He was born, we said, 1 year old he left with his father. While Jacob worked for his uncle, Jacob left his uncle when Joseph was 1 year old, and Rachel died giving birth to the second son. Jacob's love for his mother and wife was now resting in, so just 1 year. He enjoyed his wife who replaced his mother for 1 year. And now he has a firstborn from her, that is Joseph. So who is Joseph to him? He is everything that he loved, everything that he cares for. So he favored him over the rest of his children. Joseph had 2 dreams from God foretelling of his future rule over his brothers. When he was sold to Egypt, God was with him. Joseph kept the commandments of God to not commit adultery. When you hear him talking to the wife of Potiphar, the old woman saw in Joseph a very attractive young man. Again, the same way of the world. She looked at him as an object of lust. Not a person that is blessed by God, that she can actually learn from him, and he would bring her closer to God. No, she saw in him a body, a warm body. So she invited him to her bed, and the woman is married. And Joseph says something very peculiar, very interesting. What he said is, how then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God? How does he know that sleeping with a man's wife is a great wickedness? We had already established this, that this is part of the commandments given to Noah. You don't hear about it in Abraham covenant, but you hear about them in general, that Abraham will keep his commandments, God's commandments, and pass it on to his children. In the third dream, Joseph is the strongest type of Christ, the beloved son of his father. So, who was envied by his brothers. They wanted to kill him and sold him for silver and was with him and made him successful. He had the gift of interpreting dreams. He interpreted 2 dreams. One about bread that represented a crucified body. Another dream was about wine. Think about that. Before he is going to be the great man in Egypt and the savior of the world, he had to interpret 2 dreams in the prison. One about bread and one about wine. The one about bread represented a body that would be hung on a cross. And the one about the wine was to be poured in a cup. Okay? So the final dream is about Pharaoh dreaming something very strong, and it happened twice. And after that dream, immediately Joseph is called what? What's the title given to him? Zabanat Bania means Savior of the world. Who is that? that has bread and wine before he's hung on a tree, on a cross, and then became the Savior of the world. Who's this? The strongest type of Christ in the Old Testament is Joseph. There's no one more than him. Even when I talked about Jacob in the offering, there's not as obvious as this one. He married a Gentile wife, that Jesus married the church of the Gentiles and became the husband of the universal church. He managed the food stores for all the world, and everybody would come to receive it from his hands. Joseph brought his children to his father Jacob, who came to Egypt to see him and live with him. God the Father adopts the children of the Gentile church to be his children and inherit the glory of the Son. And we are all invited to inherit the glory of Christ. In the blessing of the sons of Joseph, there were two sons, Manasseh and Ephraim. Manasseh is the older. Jacob crossed his hands to pass the blessing from the younger to the older, and he made a sign of the cross, which is interesting because you're going to see this sign again in Moses, but this is the first time we hear about it, that Jacob actually crossed his hands, and he passed the blessing of the firstborn to the younger. Jacob took the two sons of Joseph to be his own children. Pay attention to this. Manasseh and Ephraim became two tribes in Israel, equal to Reuben, Simeon, and Judah. Joseph is not found in the tribes. There is no tribe called the tribe of Joseph. If you hear about the tribe of Joseph, it's actually Ephraim. Ephraim becomes the king tribe together with Judah. Manasseh and Ephraim became two tribes in Israel. Joseph forgave his brothers and revealed his understanding of God's plan for the family of Jacob from Abraham. Abraham already had said this before, and Joseph understand all that. But as for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good in order to bring it about as it to this day, to save many people alive. Joseph believed the conclusion Abraham came to, that God can raise the dead. How do we know that? And believe God promised to his grandfather that the fourth generation will return to Canaan because of those two reasons, that God will raise from the dead and that he will take them out of Egypt. What did he say? Take my bones with you. Why would anybody say that? Why would anybody talk about their bones? The Egyptians believed in the resurrection, that they kept food in the tombs, but he believed also that they will come out of Egypt and go to the promised land. That's why he wanted his bones to be taken. He said, you will be taken out of here. Take my bones with you because God will raise us, and I want to be with my family when we are raised. The line, quickly, we have Abraham and Sarah. I took Ishmael out. There's Isaac and Rebekah. You have Jacob and Esau. I took Esau out. So you have Jacob with 4 wives. Leah on one side, on the extreme side of the left. Rachel on the extreme side of the right. And then Rachel, maidservant Zilpah. And Leah's, I'm sorry, it's the opposite. Sorry, this is actually a mistake. Bilhah is the Rachel side. Bilhah with Dan and Naphtali should be on this side. I'm going to fix that. Bilhah should be toward Rachel, and Zilpah toward Leah. But I think I put them this way. I'm telling you why I put them this way. Because this is the order of having the children. Starts with Leah, 4, all the way to Judah. And then Bilhah, 2. Then Zilpah, 2. Then Rachel, 2. This is the order. And then before Rachel gets her 2, Leah gets another 2 to have 6 total. Okay? Now, what I want you to notice here, when we said the firstborn, is it the firstborn of the father or the firstborn of the mother? Again, biblical firstborn. The one who opens the womb. Is it the womb of the father or the womb of the mother? Does the father has a womb? No. It's a trick. So it has to be, so how many firstborn sons Jacob has? 4. 4 firstborn. Who are they? Reuben, Dan, Gad, and Joseph. According to the covenant, they're all to carry a mission, to carry a blessing. They're firstborn. So you would expect that Reuben, Dan, Gad, and Joseph would have a special place in the blessing. And they do. And they are written in that order. So they're written first, and then comes the rest of their kids, their brothers. So let's go and see very quickly. This is the last piece. Judah. Okay. He calls him, you are he whom your brothers shall praise. What does Judah mean? To stretch our hands in praise. Yada, Yahudah. My hands are lifted up to you, O Lord, in praise. So it's praise. The word praise is in there. He's taken it to mean that your brothers will praise you. And St. Paul is going to use it in Romans. He's going to say the Jew from Judah is not whom the people praise, but who God praises. Your hand shall be on the neck of your enemies. Again, the hand, the yadah. Your father's children shall bow down before you. Why? Why Judah? Why Judah that he's giving him the brothers to bow down to? Okay. What happened to, let's go back. Is he the firstborn of Leah? Who is the firstborn of Leah? So what happened to those Reuben? Forget about Reuben. What about Simeon? What about Levi? Why Judah? He's not the firstborn of Leah. Okay. Let's continue. Judah is a lion. That's why you have the line of David. Lion. A lion's whelp. From the prey, my son, you have gone up. He bows down, he lies down as a lion. And as a lion, who shall rouse him? The scepter, the ruler, the king's rod, shall not depart from Judah. He's giving him the kingdom. Jacob is giving him, frankly, the kingdom. You're going to be the king. The kings will come out of you. And he says, nor a lawgiver from between his feet until Shiloh comes. And here the Jews understood this very clearly. He's talking about the Messiah. That the kingdom will not depart from Judah until the Messiah comes from him. So they understood that the Messiah has to come from Judah, very simply. And until Shiloh come, and to him shall be the obedience of the people. Binding his donkey, the Messiah will have a donkey, to the vine. And his donkey is called, the son of a donkey, to a choice vine. He washed his garments in wine, and his clothes in the blood of grapes. His eyes are darker than wine, and his teeth whiter than milk. And that's the blessing of Judah. It talks about the Messiah very clearly. The blessing of Jacob, his fourth son, Judah, was clearly about the royal line. There is a specific reference to the Messiah, Shiloh, who comes riding on a donkey and ties it to a vineyard. Why was Judah picked for the royal line and not the firstborn Reuben? The first three sons of Jacob had lost their favor with their father. If you read the Genesis account, Reuben committed adultery with Bilhah, the mother of his brothers. It was crazy. And why he did that? Not for lust, by the way. I'm just going to tell you that. Because when Joseph started to be very favored, Reuben felt he's going to be in risk of losing everything because his father loves Joseph too much. He waited until Rachel died, and he went in and slept with Bilhah. Did he force her? Did he not force her? We don't know. Eventually, Jacob heard of it, and it made him very, very unhappy. He was not violent, but he shut down completely from his son. So this is number one, Reuben. What about Simeon and Levi, the second and the third? One day, their sister, Dinah, got raped by a Canaanite man. Very, very corrupt culture. And that man was a prince in a little town, Shechem. And his name was Shechem because his father named the town on him. So Shechem raped her, but then he went back and felt sorry for the girl because she was very meek. And the people were very kind. So he said, I want to fix my problem. I love the girl. I want to marry her and fix this issue. Simeon and Levi didn't like it a bit. They said, okay, you want to marry our sister? Fine. We cannot marry an uncircumcised person. You have to circumcise yourself and the rest of the men in your town. And they spoke to the town. And the men said, we'll do whatever you want. We love you. We want you to be happy. And it will be good for us. So what did they do? They waited 3 days. What happens when you're circumcised without any antiseptics, without any cleaning? You get a cut in your skin. After 1 day, 2 days, what happens? You get infected. And by the time it heals, it takes you a week or 10 days. So they took them in the highest fever when they were sick, cut all their throats, all the men of the and they took their wives and kids as slaves. Simeon and Levi. Jacob heard. What did he feel? What did he feel? Awful. And he called them, their swords are tools of violence, and my soul will never be in their counsel. He also shut down from the second and the third. Who comes next? Judah. That's very simple. So the firstborn lost his right. The second and third lost it. Who comes next? Number 4. And Judah is number 4. So what about Joseph? He gives him the firstborn again. He gives him another one. Joseph is a fruitful bough by a well. His branches run over the wall. The archer have bitterly grieved him. He's talking about the people that bothered him in his life. Bitterly means give him a hard time. Shot at him and hated him, but his bow remained in strength, and the arms of his hands were made strong by the hands of the mighty God of Jacob. From there is the shepherd, the stone of Israel. He talks about God. By the God of your father who will help you, and by the Almighty who will bless you. Why did he call him a branch? A vine branch. We'll see. With blessings of heaven above, blessings of the deep that lies beneath, blessing of the breasts and the womb, the blessings of your father have exalted the blessing of my ancestors. Jacob is talking about Isaac and Abraham. Up to the utmost bound of everlasting hill, they shall be on the head of Joseph, and the crown on the crown of the head of him who was separate. The word in Hebrew, nitzer. What does separate mean, nitzer? What does it mean? It means a branch. So what is nitzer? Because we're going to talk about Nazarite vow. It is unpruned branch. Branch that you don't cut, that you don't touch. So what happens when you prune all the branches and one branch sticks out? He is unpruned. So that means left alone, non-touched. That's why the Nazarite vow is to get a person and don't cut their hair. And they don't touch a dead man. They don't go into social activity. They are sticking out like a sore thumb. So nitzer could be a branch unpruned or a consecrated person. Same thing, one and the same. So what's he saying? Your brother Joseph, you were separated. You were not part of us. You were taken away from us. God wanted this for you to be what? To be a consecrated person so that we can be saved through you. Okay? So Joseph do you think Joseph had more blessing than Judah, or Judah had more blessing than Joseph? I believe Joseph had more blessing than, because there is a personal touch there. Jacob is talking to him on a personal level because he favors him. So this is the second, he talked about the one from Leah, and now I talk about the one from Rachel. He blessed also Dan, the firstborn of Bela, and Gad, the firstborn of Zilpah. I'm not going to go into this. It's not important for us. And that's it. Any questions? Yes?
As Genesis was written by Moses, how did Moses know of the details of what God spoke to Abraham in full detail? Was it revealed to him from God or through tradition?
It is tradition. They knew these things. Like, I want to say something. How do you train your child? If Abraham is going to sit with Isaac, or Isaac is going to sit with Jacob, they are shepherds. What do shepherds have? Absolutely. They have all the time in the world. They sit around with the sheep grazing, and there's not a time to cut their wool or to do something. And day after day, what they do, they train them on their ancestry, genealogy lines, promises by God. They just give it to them literally by the letter. They give it to them like food every single day. The Jews took those traditions orally, and they do it the same way in the synagogues. We as Christians are failing to do this, unfortunately. We don't know how to teach our kids and to make this number one priority in our life. That's the covenant. That is exactly the covenant. A covenant is to teach your kids exactly what God has given you, what you have received from your ancestors, and you give it one generation to another. God depended on Abraham to do this. He said, I know him, and he will command his children to do the commandments of God and to keep his covenant. This is something God trusts the parents for. And if we don't do it right, we're going to break the covenant. Absolutely. When Jesus gave his disciples, same thing. We hear Jesus talking to the disciples at the end when he's ascending. What did he say? Baptize them and do what? And teach them everything that I have taught you. This is the covenant. Passes from one generation to another. But we leave our kids to learn from the internet. We leave our kids to learn from the TV, from their friends, from the schools, from the teachers, from the society. And we stand there and say, oh, we're feeding them and, clothing them. They don't want, what do they need more? No, they need much more. God needs much more. Okay. Is that it? Let's say our Father. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, make us worthy, O Lord, to say thankfully, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from the evil one. In Christ Jesus our Lord. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory now and forever. May the love of God the Father and grace of his only begotten Son, Jesus Christ, and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit be with you. Peace be with you. We're reading. What are we reading next? Exodus. We're let me tell you, I'm just going to go into the syllabus and tell you exactly what we're reading for next time. You have it in the syllabus. It is Exodus 1 to 4, 12, 14, 16 to 20. If you want my advice, 1 to 20. 1 to 20. Okay.